Live from the Pioneer PBS studios in Granite Falls, it's Meet the Candidates. This candidate forum is designed to inform you, the viewing public, about the candidates running for Minnesota state office in our region. Meet the Candidates is brought to you by the members of Pioneer PBS. This program features the candidates for Minnesota House District 12B. And now your moderator for tonight's program, Jim Thureen.
Hello, welcome to Meet the Candidates. I am Jim Thureen, your host for this session. Tonight's question and answer session is intended to inform you about those running for Minnesota state office in your district. This program deals with District 12B. Here's a short clip about what explains who is in that district, and we'll learn more about who is running.
Minnesota House District 12B includes portions of Douglas, Pope, and Stearns counties. Major cities include Sauk Centre, Melrose, and Glenwood.
So if this is your district, please call or send in your questions for the candidates via the methods on the screen. In the meantime, let's meet tonight's candidates. And we'll have opening statements from each of the two candidates. The toss was won by it was by the challenger for Representative Anderson. And Ben Schermers will be offering the first of our opening statements. Mr. Schermers.
Thank you, Jim. I'm happy to be here tonight. I'm a dairy farmer from just southwest of Sauk Centre, and I'm running for District 12B. I guess my main concern is agriculture. I have a couple of nephews who are trying to get into the farm, and I just wonder about their future as far as taking over the farm and being able to operate a small dairy in an environment that seems to favor very large operations and corporate structures. This is something that's bothered me because I feel like I have been hindered by this personally in my career as a dairy farmer. Also, of course, there's a number of issues I think that we'll get into tonight, which include the COVID-19 situation and education and all the other things. I should mention that my sign, which I have out in the district, has an issue on each of the four corners: agriculture, education, veterans, and reform. And what we mean by reform is the way campaigns are run. So we've made a pledge not to take any money from PACs, super PACs, special interest groups, and even unions. We've only taken money from individual contributors. And I feel like that is the difference between some of our politicians in office and some of the little people that are just trying to get going and have a voice in the process. So that's why I'm running, and I have nothing but respect for Representative Paul Anderson. It isn't something where I'm trying to dislodge him or I'm upset with what he's done. I think he's a good representative. I just want to give people another option. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Ben Schermers. Our challenger for this district, the incumbent, is Representative Paul Anderson. Your opening statement.
Jim, thank you. And I'd also like to say thank you to Pioneer Public Television for offering us this opportunity to kind of get together in the face of the COVID situation and let the residents of the district kind of get to meet us and hear what we have to say about the topics that they phone into us tonight. As we all know that things have really changed in also the way we campaign. A lot of our church breakfasts and dinners and firemen suppers have been canceled, although some now are doing some drive-through meals, and that's worked pretty well in some instances. But things are different, and we hope that it gets back to a new normal situation sometime in the very near future. Again, my name is Representative Paul Anderson. I'm finishing up my sixth term in the Minnesota House. And thinking back over these last 12 years, I think I've been in the majority about half the time, 3 terms majority, 3 terms minority. And the Minnesota House has a kind of a history of flip-flopping quite often in terms of which party is in power. Democrats, DFL, and Republicans kind of take turns at the helm. 2 years back, I was chair of the Ag Policy Committee in the Minnesota House, and this time around now, we are in the minority. And my main focus in the legislature is the lead Republican on a committee known as the Greater Minnesota Jobs and Economic Development Committee. And one of the things that we oversee, at least on the House side, is the Minnesota Border-to-Border Broadband Grant Program. And as we've learned in the COVID situation, broadband is not so much a luxury anymore. It really is a necessity for those of us living in Greater Minnesota. As we find out, our students are having to do distance learning, and parents, moms and dads are finding they are being asked to work from home. And if you don't have a good internet connection, good high-speed connection, it's a real disadvantage for both students and their parents. So we need to work on building out that infrastructure, and we may talk more about that later on, but I serve on that key position in that committee. Also, I'm a member of the House Agriculture, Food and Policy Committee, and also the Environment Policy Committee in the Minnesota House. My experience goes back, I went to college and went to be a teacher, and instead came back home to the family farm. And in these last 30 or 40 years, our family raises corn, soybeans, wheat, and used to raise cattle. I was a township clerk for my home township, Barsness Township, for I think 23 years is what my plaque said when I retired. I've also been on the Starbuck Board of Education and spent a couple of years on the Pope County Board of Commissioners. So that kind of is who I am and why I'd like to continue serving you here in St. Paul.
Well, thank you, gentlemen, for our beginning of this process of debating issues of the day. Again, a reminder to our viewers, the telephone call is right there. If you'd rather get to us through the internet, you may do that as well. But we urge you to give us your questions. We'll present them to the incumbent and to the challenger and get the answers questioned. And it's up to you, the voters, to decide how you're going to use that information to make your choice. Again, we remind you too that this is a different year because of the COVID situation. So we anticipate that there will be a lot of ballots cast absentee, and you could best call your local county auditor's office for information about when you can vote and how to do it. So we urge you to cast your vote, whether it's pre-election day or on election day. But Minnesota has a great record for turnout when it comes to elections, and we ask you and suggest you do your part by contacting your local county auditor or your city clerk, and they'll give you information. All right, we've got the election coming up in November. Here we are in September, and we have some things to talk about. And if I understand correctly, Representative Anderson, you get the first question. That's what we did with the, okay. So here we go. And this comes from somebody in Glenwood. What do you think about, let's see here, there we go. What do you believe and think about what the state of Minnesota should do about the fact that so many small town streets have deteriorated or having challenges in repairing them? Is there something that you would recommend in the coming session to address many small town main streets as to their physical condition?
That's an interesting question because we're looking at possibly reductions in state gas tax collections, and of course gas tax collections are what funds our streets and highway projects and also our projects with the MnDOT program as well as statewide program. And so it's going to be tight, I think, at least for the next year or so. Our state budget disappeared in a hurry back in March, and now we're looking at a potential $5 billion deficit. So I wouldn't look for any new programs in terms of funding our local city streets. They do get portions of gas tax revenue, and our cities under 5,000 residents as well get a separate pot of money from the state. But I wouldn't look for those to increase because of the situation our state is in with reduced revenue collections and such like that. So we may have to patch another year or two, but it certainly is an issue, and there are some major projects going on in the city of Starbuck right now. They're doing a complete streets project. There's federal money there. There's state money also on that project. And these are planned years and ahead. And also the city of Sauk Center has a major street repair project coming up in the year, I believe, 2025, so about 4 years down the road, going to be redoing Highway 71, that major thoroughfare through Sauk Center. It receives a lot of heavy truck traffic and such. So that's coming up in just a couple of years over in Sauk Center. But in terms of additional funding, again, because of our state budget situation, I wouldn't look for additional funding coming down to our cities and counties and such with the way we are trying to balance the budget in terms of the COVID situation.
All right, thank you, Representative Anderson. Now the question for challenger Ben Schermers. What do you think about the state of Minnesota streets and the fact that we've got so many small towns in need of some great repair?
Yes, that's very interesting. I've had the opportunity to go through Starbuck a couple times in the last few months and see the progress of that complete streets progress there, or project there. And I'm sure the folks there really appreciate that. And of course, that's something that probably has been appropriated years before. And what we're probably talking about here is projects that are going to be happening in the future. I know probably the situation with the local government aid, or LGA, is going to become very key to a lot of small town cities planning with their budgets and with their street programs. Of course, LGA is the program that where small towns and cities under 5,000 people are able to appropriate money. I know that Sauk Center is slated for, I think, $2.1 million in LGA for 2021, and I think, like, take a small town just down the road from Starbuck, Bruton, I believe they're slated for $204,000 in the year 2021. These are things we probably need to try to protect in the budget. If these cities are going to be able to decide what to do with those types of monies, and that relates to their streets and their infrastructure and public safety and other things, they get to decide how to use it. So I would try to protect LGA if I were in the state legislature.
All right, and Representative Anderson, a brief response.
Just a quick response on the LGA situation. Our cities and counties are in a little bit of a difficult situation as they have to come up with their preliminary budgets as we speak this time of the year. And those budgets have to be finalized in December. And with the uncertainty with the state budget, a lot of cities are planning for either no increase or a possible cut in LGA. So it's a difficult time for them trying to budget for next year, not knowing for sure the future of LGA. And I understand the situation, and some are looking at maybe some levy increases because of that. But again, this is all brought about by the economy kind of being shut down, slowed down, and a lack of revenue coming into basically all levels of government.
All right, thank you, Representative Anderson. Candidate Schermers, do you have any other brief response to that?
No.
Okay. All right, why don't we go to our next question, and we thank somebody from the Starbuck area who gives us this question. For each of you, first this one will go to challenger Ben Schermers. Do you agree with the governor's continued use of emergency powers?
Well, Jim, I'm just a small-time dairy farmer, so I don't think I can tell the governor what to do or what not to do. My only understanding of the situation is that he thinks that he should hang on to his emergency powers until the Mayo Clinic says that the COVID-19 crisis is no longer a public health threat. That's my understanding. So our Governor Walz is a duly elected governor, just like President Trump is a duly elected president, and I don't really know what my voice can do to try and change opinions on such a high level, unless I got elected.
All right, thank you. And now the same question for Representative Anderson. Do you agree with the governor's continued use of emergency powers?
My short answer is no, I don't. The emergency, I think, is passed back in March when he established his peacetime emergency. We all agreed that the situation was unknown. We didn't know what to expect in terms of how many people would be affected by the COVID situation. And right off the bat, the governor and his staff used some modeling with the help from the University of Minnesota. And the modeling seemed to be so far off base when we actually got into the situation further. For example, their first estimate was 72,000 deaths in Minnesota because of COVID. We are under 2,000 as of today. They were talking about having hospitals stop doing elective surgeries, things like that, to make way for a possible influx of folks that needed acute care, ICU care. And again, that rush of patients never happened either. There was even talk about using our downtown Minneapolis stadiums as overflows for ICU beds if, in fact, it got as bad as they were predicting. Well, it never did. And I think people did a good job in terms of using common sense and staying home if they felt uncomfortable. The mask thing now is into effect. So we've really flattened that curve, which was the original intent of the peacetime emergency. And that was 6 months ago. And people are getting frustrated. Businesses are having a difficult time making cash flow needs. Restaurants really can't function at 50% capacity. And those that have outdoor patios, when the weather gets cold here, as it does in Minnesota, the patios shut down. And just a lot of concern for business moving ahead, trying to stay in business in light of all of the restrictions placed on Minnesota businesses by the governor. And I think the time for him to give up those powers happened several months back.
All right, thank you, candidate Anderson. We do have a brief rebuttal from Ben Schermers.
Sure, I agree that, you know, and even I think Governor Walz said that some of the projections and things were wrong. And believe me, I, as a bar band operator for the last 15 years, hate the fact that I can't get my band into these bars that are closed. But what I've seen is a lot of, well, just plain not following of the rules in these small town bars and many of these small town businesses. So I really don't see how, even if Senator Gazelka got his way and shut down Governor Walz's emergency powers, I really, at least in terms of the mask thing, I really don't see how that would make much difference when a lot of these big box stores like Menards and Walmart are going to keep that policy in place anyways.
All right, thank you, candidate Ben Schermers. Now we go to the next question. That will go first to Representative Paul Anderson. The question comes to us from DeGraff. Thank you for joining us. What is your opinion on they use the phrase right to work either as a law or as a concept, however you want to approach that? your opinion on right to work.
Thanks for that question. It's interesting. That has to do with if you have to join a union, for example, to get a job. And I think a person's right to work should be that, a right to work. And in a lot of instances, teachers, for example, you can choose to pay partial union dues and not be a full member. And I think that's a step in the right direction. But right to work has been instituted in a number of states, and it seems that their employment rates go up. It's good for business, that employers can hire more people, and I think overall it's good for business if we had that in Minnesota.
All right, thank you, sir. And same question for Ben Schermers. Your opinion on the concept or the law, right to work.
Yeah, Jim, I received, of course, as a candidate, you receive a lot of these letters in the mail, and this time around, a lot of them are going in the garbage can, and right to work went in the garbage can. I believe in collective bargaining. I think that has value, even though I'm not a union member, or I'm not even close to a union member. I think that has some value just because it keeps employers on their toes. So this right to work thing, I don't really understand it. I threw it in the garbage can. I don't know much about it, to be honest with you, but that's my answer there.
All right, thank you, Ben Schermers, for that response. And if we're following our protocol properly, the next question, I believe, will first go to you, Ben. So we have a viewer from, now, Paul, have you had the right to work law? Okay, and so you've had your answer, Ben's had his answer. If I'm confused, I'm right on target. Okay, it's one of those days. All right, so the next question will start with the challenger, Ben Schermers. Okay, so here we go. Are you a two-part question? Are you a law and order candidate? And how do you feel about defunding police departments?
Oh, thank you, Jim. Well, I tell you what. I, as a younger person, was pretty wild, and I got spanked by the law enforcement and criminal justice system, and I think I needed it. And I think I'm a better person for it. So the answer to the question is no, we're not going to defund the police. And I think it's interesting that a lot of the signs you see, particularly in the area of Sauk Center and Melrose and Bruton and Belgrade, a lot of signs say support our local police, support our local law enforcement, I think it says. And how can you not be for that? I think where this all started was the situations down in the Twin Cities and the Minneapolis Police Department, and even the Minneapolis City Council is coming around to the fact that they need more police on the streets. They were just berating Minneapolis Police Chief Madera Arredondo, I believe 3 days ago, for all the crime that's going on in the Twin Cities. So we have to separate some Twin Cities issues from our rural area issues. I don't think ever any Democrats, in the state party, said that we wanted to defund the police. That's just bull. They never said that, but they're being painted with that. And I think that's wrong. I think we're going to be strong for law enforcement, and we're going to do the right thing for the criminal justice system, including funding, whatever it takes. I think that's got to be very clear.
All right, thank you, candidate Schermers. Representative Anderson, 2 questions. Are you a law and order candidate, and how do you feel about defunding police departments?
Yes, emphatically, I am a law and order candidate, and we cannot, should not defund police in any of our cities in this country. I feel very strongly about that. My opponent talked about no Democrats wanting to do anything such as that, and yet on tape there was an endorsed candidate, endorsed by Governor Walz no less, saying we're going to come to Hugo and burn down the city of Hugo. If that isn't promoting violence and whatever else, I think that certainly is an example of that, and they haven't really backed off their support of this particular candidate either. So I think this election, both statewide and nationally, law and order is going to be a big topic. You know, the riots hit Minneapolis and St. Paul, and the authorities in charge didn't bring in the National Guard in time. There was wanton destruction, millions of dollars in damage done, and now those folks are trying to rebuild and get help, and it's really a difficult situation. And without law and order, you cannot function as a society. And I've said for a long time that if there are not consequences when the laws are broken, that is a quick way to start breaking down our society. And I have concerns about some of our major cities that have a Democratic leadership. They seem to be not promoting law enforcement, and even worse, there's a lack of respect for people in law enforcement in some of these cities by some people. Not saying it's all one party or not, but we need to get back on track. And one of the three main functions of government is public safety. The education and the transportation, along with public safety, are three core functions of government. And we need to get back on track and recognize the valuable work done by our police, respect them, and show support to them as they do their very difficult jobs in protecting us every day of the week.
All right, thank you, Candidate Anderson and Representative. Again, a reminder for our viewers that we do encourage your questions, and also remember, November 3rd is not that far away, and this year we know there will be a lot of people voting by absentee ballot, or if maybe choosing to be there on election day. But it's going to be a very different election from any other in our past history. So we go on to our next question, which will be addressed first to Representative Anderson. What do you think about what the legislature can do to ensure water quality of our lakes and rivers so that we do not continue deterioration?
Minnesota has a good set of regulations in terms of protecting our water quality. Lakes and rivers are important to people of Minnesota, and the Pollution Control Agency does a good job in regulating some of these things, and the DNR also plays a big role in that. And people want clean water. We all want clean water, farmers included. We live on the land, we drink the water, so it's in our best interest as well to ensure and do what we can to make sure our water supply is clean and safe. There are programs, federal programs that would retire land. There are also state programs that would take land out of production and put it aside and cover crops and such. To be honest, I'm not a real big fan of some of these permanent programs when you set aside land in perpetuity. I'm more of a fan of a CRP type program where you sign a 10 or a 15-year contract and set aside that land and put it into cover crop and habitat for wildlife. So those programs are working well. We did pass this buffer law back in 2015. And on my way down tonight, I happened to notice some county ditches, and they had their 16-foot wide buffers along the edges of those ditches. So Minnesota, I think, is making progress. And also the nitrogen rule went into effect just at the beginning of this month. And currently, after September 1st, you cannot apply nitrogen in certain areas of the state, mainly around what's called the drinking water protection areas. So the Department of Agriculture is going to be enforcing that in terms of applying nitrogen in the fall on some of these very fragile areas. So we are making progress, and I think making good progress in that area.
All right, that question has come to us, by the way, from Montevideo, somebody that's on a body of water. And we'll now give that same question to Ben Schermers. What do you think that can be done by the legislature to ensure water quality of our lakes and rivers, that they will not continue to deteriorate?
Yeah, actually, this is an area I really think that Representative Anderson has done a good job on. He was chair of the Ag Policy Committee and helped to get some of these things in place. Maybe not the buffer strip rule exactly, but I think the buffer strip rule has become something less than a controversial thing like it was. I think it's a very valuable program as far as filtering out some of the nitrates and phosphorus and things that would otherwise end up in our creeks and then end up in our lakes. I have a feeling that Representative Anderson, coming from the top of the hill in Glenwood overlooking Lake Minnewaska, really cares deeply about this issue. And the only thing I would say is other, things like trying to not defund our watershed districts and stuff would probably be a good start to staying on track with the water quality situations. I would also say that, well, I lost my train of thought here. I'll just turn it back over to you, Paul.
All right, any response, Representative Anderson?
Yeah, thank you, Jim. Just a quick response. We both mentioned the buffer law, and yeah, it isn't as controversial as it was 3 or 4 years ago. But the one issue about that still hasn't been addressed is compensation for landowners who are giving up productive farmland to put into grass filter strips. It is taking land without compensation, and we've worked on that for a couple of years, weren't successful for a number of reasons, not knowing for sure how many acres would be involved and what the payment would be, but there's still kind of a spot where you wonder, was it ethical for the state to order this land out of production without compensation? But as we move on to other issues and such, the buffer bill has taken effect and it's doing its job to protect waters in Minnesota.
All right, thank you, Representative Anderson. Any additional response, Ben?
No, just thank you for that. I think it's something that, although there are definitely some hiccups along the way, including on our farm, where my brothers wanted to put the buffer strip into CRP, and so they trimmed all the trees along the creek. The existing creek had about let's say a 20-foot natural buffer around it with trees, so that, I just wish that somebody from the Soil and Water could have came out and said, hey, you guys are good, that looks good, all the critters and the birds and stuff can be in them trees, instead of shaving it out for CRP, which wound up didn't happen. It wound up not happening anyway because, well, I think I'm rambling. It's kind of a long story how it worked out, but I think government should just be very careful of the kind of rules they make.
All right, thank you, sir. And if I've got my notes correct here, we start the next question with Ben again. All right. You'll keep me in line on this. I know you will, gentlemen. Okay. We have a question that comes from Bruton. This is to Challenger and Ben. Do you believe and think that the ethnic diversity of our rural areas is being welcomed for these immigrants, and that it is good for rural Minnesota?
Jim, I don't think ethnic diversity is being welcomed in this election cycle. But I think when it comes to hiring folks, immigrants, even refugees in our farms, on our farms, and our processing plants, I think it has been welcomed. So you sort of have a dichotomy going on where, on one hand, you raise the Donald Trump flag and say, kick them out. On the other hand, we need you to come in for our businesses, and we need you to come in and raise your families so that hopefully Social Security stays solvent. So I don't really know what the clear answer from folks in our district is, I hear things all across the board. So really, I personally am for immigration. If they're good folks coming in that want to work and raise families, because they're going to pay taxes and they're going to be productive and they're going to milk cows and they're going to process hogs and they're going to butcher turkeys and they're going to work in our other processing facilities for a low wage generally. But that's how you get started. That's how I did.
All right. Thank you, Ben Schermers. And the same question now for Representative Anderson. Do you think that the ethnic diversity and the welcoming of immigrants to rural Minnesota has been good for our areas?
I think it has been, because if somebody is here legally, they're welcomed, and we need the increased workforce. And just one comment I'd like to make. President Trump is not saying to kick anybody out of this country if they are here legally, if they have a green card, because we realize that we need these additional workers. The demographics of Minnesota are aging, and a lot of people are retiring, in fact, more retiring than entering the workforce. So we're going to need workers that come from other areas, other countries, to help fill our job force. They're needed, they're beneficial, and they're good for our economy, they're good for our country. And we need to realize that, and there needs to be a path for them to be here legally, and a path to citizenship following that. And because of that, yes, I think welcoming immigrants to Minnesota, again, if they're here legally, is a good thing for our area.
All right. Anything to add, Mr. Schermers? No, okay, very good. On we go to the next one, and if I'm doing things correctly, that should go to Representative Anderson. Okay, you're in concurrence. Are you voting aye or nay? All right, never mind. You're not casting votes today. Here we go. Question comes from the Alexandria area. What guides your decision-making process in extreme circumstances? The Constitution, presumably of the U.S. or Minnesota, or the circumstances of that event?
That's an interesting question. Obviously, when we take office, we swear to uphold the Constitution both of the United States and of Minnesota, so that takes precedence. And we need to follow those laws or enact laws that make changes. And changing our Constitution is not an easy thing to do. It requires a vote of the population and such. So again, we take those responsibilities very seriously. In terms of overall how we judge things and vote for things and pass things, if that's what the question is getting at, we study a lot, we read a lot. And I think one thing that being in the legislature has taught me is that to try to look broadly at all sides of an issue and make a decision when you have weighed all the facts from both sides of an issue and come up with what you think is a logical and the correct vote or answer. We also get a lot of emails and correspondence from district residents, and that also plays a factor in determining how we vote on things. If I go back to the Viking Stadium bill back, 6-7 years ago, when we literally received hundreds and hundreds of emails, most of those, I'd say 95% in favor of the stadium, and that did play a factor in deciding how I would vote on that. I think the stadium at the time was good economically for Minneapolis and for Minnesota, and voted for it at the time. So resident pressure, constituent comment plays a role as well. But again, just using common sense and some of my basic Christian beliefs to determine how I would vote on things is kind of how I operate in St. Paul.
All right. And the same question for challenger Ben Schermers. What guides your decision-making process in extreme circumstances? the Constitution of either the state or nation, or the circumstances of the situation?
Sure. Well, I'm just a small potato dealing with my own life issues. I really thought it was interesting, though, watching how state government operated from about mid-March, through till now, but the situation where, imagine what it would have been like to be Governor Walz in mid-March when healthcare professionals are telling you that we've got a virus coming in from China that is potentially going to kill 70,000 people. I mean, that 70,000 people isn't Governor Walz's number. That's what healthcare professionals were telling him. Imagine being the governor under those circumstances. And then in late May, George Floyd was killed by Minneapolis police. And it was a social media thing that, was shared. And we all know how the social media world works these days now. We're not blind to it. It spreads, and it turned into riots. Imagine being in Governor Walz's shoes when these things hit you. I thought actually he was able to handle things as best as you could under those circumstances. It just makes you wonder, would you put yourself in those shoes? Or if you watch Band of Brothers on TV, what would you do if you were a soldier in World War II? These are some heavy things, and I think we should cut him a little more credit than what people are cutting him. All I see around the area are recall Walz signs, and I don't know, we have to have empathy for other people. I think we got to put ourselves in other people's shoes and then think about, what would you do?
All right, thank you. Representative Anderson, a short rebuttal.
Yeah, just to comment, I agree that it's not been an easy job these last few months for our governor. My only concern is that I wish he'd open the door a little bit and let the legislature take part in making some of these very difficult decisions. We were elected by the people, as was the governor, but ever since the peacetime emergency went into effect, it's been largely the decisions, major decisions have been made by the governor and his commissioners, and the legislature is an equal branch of government, and we are just asking to be allowed to come back into the room and be a part of those decisions being made on behalf of Minnesotans.
All right, thank you. We next turn to a question that will be first directed to Ben Schermers, if I'm doing this correctly. Gentlemen, you correct me if I'm wrong. But the question is this. There is a projected $4 billion deficit in the state budget. What specific plans would you support to solve this problem?
Thank you, Jim. I've been reading a lot of stories in the Star Tribune about the Department of Human Services, DHS, and a lot of problems they have there. I just want to say this isn't my opinion that DHS should be cut in any way, but they're opening themselves up for legislators. They're putting a target on themselves for legislators to go after them. So I hope that Governor Walz, and I forget the name of the new commissioner of DHS, but I hope they can fix that house soon before legislators go after them. Otherwise, I think that's where the budget is probably going to get solved, along with probably taking out of the, $2.5 billion out of the rainy day fund. That's the only way I see a way out of the budget problem. I think Paul can probably set me straight on that.
All right, and with that, we'll turn to Representative Anderson. There is the projected $4 billion deficit. What specific plans would you support to solve the problem?
Well, the rainy day fund is gone already. The state surplus is gone. And that $4 billion surplus, the last numbers I heard, could be as high as $5.5 billion. It's a serious issue, and it's going to be a difficult task to balance the budget in the next biennium beginning next July. One difference between state and federal budgeting is that the state must balance its budget every 2 years. The feds seem to be able to just print money and go on, but we can't do that at the state. We have to balance that budget. And with that budget deficit being around, let's just say $5 billion, the state's general fund revenue spent by any was about $48.5 billion spent out of the general fund during this current biennium. So that deficit is roughly 10% of the overall general fund. So right off the bat, you can look at making across-the-board cuts in all departments of, I would say, in that 4 to 5% range. You can't take a deficit of this size out of just one department, although the DHS would be a good place to start. But the deficit is so large, it may have to be a combination of reduced spending. There are hiring freezes going on right now. The governor has said he has already booked savings of about $58 million because of a hiring freeze at the state. So we have to look across the board, and I can't make any one recommendation tonight as to what I would do, because this has to be looked at in its entirety. It's a big situation, a big deficit. You have to be fair, do what's best, and not totally decimate one department and leave others untouched. So it has to be done carefully and in combination with some kind of other measures to either increase or hopefully the economy comes back. That would be the best thing, and we can get back to business as usual in Minnesota.
All right, thank you, Representative Anderson. Brief rebuttal from Mr. Schermers.
Yeah, so Representative Anderson and I both talked about cuts that need to be made. Can I just ask the question where, because I think you would have to do it with some tax increases too, very careful tax increases in certain areas. Where would those be, or would there not be any tax increases anywhere to solve the problem?
Response, Representative Anderson.
Again, at this point, I'm not going to advocate for any tax increases. People are struggling financially right now, and the last thing they need is for an increase in their taxes. I just talked to some township folks the other day, and they were wondering about gas tax revenue coming back in. Well, our driving is down about 10%. The use of gasoline and ethanol as well are down about 10%, which would indicate that our gas tax revenues could be also down by about that 10% figure. So Ben mentioned Department of Human Services. In the past year, it's been documented that some tribes were overpaid to $29 million for opioid treatments. We paid $3.7 million to dead medical assistance enrollees and another $44 million to other chemical dependency providers. So there are places where we can cut, and we have to do that and get serious about that to try to somehow balance his budget and do it in a progressive way.
All right, thank you, candidates. We're now moving to that time of our hour together. How that's flown by, but here we are. So we opened up with a statement from Ben Schermers, if I'm correct, and that means that then the first closing statement of up to 2 minutes can first come from Mr. Schermers. Ben.
Well, thank you, Jim. I thought I was supposed to close, but I can't. I'm just the junior.
We're on a roll. Let's go.
All right, you got it. So I guess I don't have really anything planned for a closing statement except that I want to come back to why I'm running in the first place. And that actually kind of comes back to the gas tax. I remember reading a story about Representative Bud Heigerken bucking his party and voting to override Governor Palente's veto, and it was on the gas tax issue. And this is why, it's part of the reason, probably the biggest reason why I wanted to run. I thought that was so interesting that somebody who had been in there and had a career decided to buck their own party and go ahead and override their governor's veto and he was blackballed for it, and he resigned the next year and recruited Representative Anderson to come into office. This story just guides me. This is amazing. The gas tax hadn't been raised since 1988 previously. I think this was 2006, if Representative Anderson wants to confirm that, or 2008, I think. This is something that I think we need bipartisan activity in the legislature, and that's not going to happen. They're not going to be bipartisan. So somebody needs to go in there and do it themselves, whatever way necessary, buck their party, do whatever it takes to make the right decisions for people. Maybe it's the gas tax, maybe it's some other big line item headline. That's what I want to do. I want to get into the legislature and do something different, operate differently. And that's why I want your vote for 12B. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, candidate Ben Schermers. Final closing comments from Representative Paul Anderson.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, folks, for listening tonight and hearing some of the views that we have in this upcoming election. It's going to be a very important election, both at the state and federal level this year. I'd like to just quickly throw in a piece of good news. We've talked about a lot of things tonight that you could look at and say, well, we don't have enough for this, don't have enough for that. But there was a meeting today, a conference call, and the Rural Finance Authority issued bonds, $25 million in bonds last month, and the rates came in so low that they are able to drop all of their interest rates nearly 2%, 1.75% to be exact, on all of the loans that they issue to farmers and others that get some of these RFA loans. So if that's something that interests you, it's a good time because interest rates have really dropped down on the RFA program through the state of Minnesota. Again, thanks for tuning in tonight. I've enjoyed this, and I would ask for your support again. I've had great support from you in the past and would ask again. I think I can be viewed somebody in St. Paul who will reach across the aisle and try to work with both sides of the aisle and come to the middle. That's where things get done and compromise and get something done for the good of the people of Minnesota. I'm fortunate to have been endorsed by a number of organizations, and I'm kind of proud of that. First of all, I've been endorsed by MCCL, Minnesota Citizens Concerned for Life. I'm pro-life, pro-family, pro-gun, pro-Second Amendment, and think this is a good place to live out here in greater Minnesota. Also endorsed by the Minnesota Police and Peace Officers Association. Appreciate their endorsement. And also I've been endorsed, again, agriculture is my passion. I'm a farmer. I've been endorsed by both major Minnesota farm organizations, the Minnesota Farmers Union and the Minnesota Farm Bureau. So with that, I've enjoyed being with you tonight. The election coming up is going to be an important one. And exercise your right to vote, whether it's in person, through the mail, or with an absentee ballot. And it's going to be important for all of us in the state of Minnesota. And again, thank you for tuning in tonight.
Well, thank you, gentlemen. That concludes our program. We want to thank both Representative Anderson and Challenger Ben Schermers for joining us tonight, and for our viewers, all those questions that you called in for their consideration tonight. To watch this and other Meet the Candidates episodes, past or present, visit video.pioneer.org or the free PBS video app. Just choose Pioneer PBS as your local station. Thanks for watching Meet the Candidates.